There was the night she slipped off her gloves, not just for comfort, but to be seen. And the waltz, echoing in that forgotten lighthouse, wasn't just a dance. It was a promise never spoken aloud. Then there was the tailor, who undid more than seams that summer in Verona. Tonight, let me take you into 3 stories where desire lingers in silence, where goodbyes are slow, and where memory tastes like skin warmed by candlelight. Are you ready to feel something you've been missing? It was the silence of Wintermere Hall that first unnerved him. Miles had arrived at the estate 2 weeks into spring, when the frost was still stubborn beneath the ivy, and the housekeeper's breath hung visible in the air. He had been hired discreetly, through a letter, without interview, to serve as private assistant to the widowed Lady Evangeline Ashcroft. He remembered his first glimpse of her, tall, wrapped in a long velvet coat, the color of ash, standing at the window of the east drawing room. She hadn't turned to greet him, merely raised a hand in acknowledgement. Her profile, even in stillness, carried something sculptural, regal, distant. You will work in the western wing. You will not enter my chambers without summons, her voice had said quietly a day later. That is all. She never smiled, not once. Miles had known how to move without being noticed. In another life, he'd been a valet to a disgraced nobleman in France. Before that, a footman. His steps were soft, his presence like mist. He did as asked, organized the study, lit the lamps before dusk, and ensured Lady Ashcroft's inkwells never ran dry. But there was one place that called to him, her chamber. Not because of disobedience, it was something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the peculiar stillness of the space itself, as if time refused to flow there. One afternoon, with the door ajar and the lady away on a rare ride, he stepped in. The room was modest for a woman of her standing. No gilt, no mirrors. The fireplace was unlit, and a single candle had melted halfway down beside the writing desk. Her bed was neatly made, except for the pillow, indented slightly and not quite aligned. It was under that pillow he found them. Letters, 20 or so, neatly tied with faded green ribbon, corners worn as though they'd been read and reread. Miles didn't intend to read them, truly, but his fingers, of their own accord, untied the knot and unfolded the first. I wonder if you know how you looked that evening, standing in the snowlight, eyes heavy, lips trembling from what you would not say. His throat dried. He wasn't sure what stunned him more, that the letter had clearly never been sent, or that the words felt like truth. He read 3 more. Each was unsigned. Each described a different moment. A night of music drifting through locked doors, the scent of violets in spring, the ache of fingers brushing a coat button and then retreating. But the 4th letter, that one mentioned him, not by name, but unmistakably him. I watch him from the end of the corridor when he thinks no one sees. The way he moves is careful, not cautious, considerate, like someone who once learned how to carry fragile things and never forgot. Miles folded the letter with trembling hands. A noise at the door made him freeze, but it was only the wind. From that day on, he was no longer just the quiet man polishing banisters and winding clocks. Every gesture he made in her presence became heavier, more deliberate. Every look she didn't give him became an ache, and she never said a word. She never acknowledged anything. Until the rainstorm. It had been a violent spring evening, the kind that made the old trees lean and moan. Lady Ashcroft had returned late, her cloak soaked through. She didn't speak as he took it from her shoulders, only stood in the entry hall, her dress clinging to her form, her cheeks flushed not with cold, but something he couldn't name. He had turned to hang the cloak when her voice stopped him. "You've been in my chambers." The silence after was a cliff edge. "Yes," he said softly. There was no use in denial. His voice was steady, but he didn't turn. "You read them." "Only some." He could hear her footsteps behind him, closer, one more, then another. "And you knew they were about you?" "Yes." "And yet, you stayed." She was near enough now that he could smell the storm on her skin, a trace of lavender and rainwater. Her breath was steady. "I wanted to know if they were still true." "Were they?" He turned, finally, slowly. She looked younger in the candlelight, her hair damp at the temples, her eyes not sharp or cold, but bare, like something waiting. "I don't know yet," he said. They didn't touch, not yet. But in the hours that followed, he found himself awake long into the night, listening to the wind press against the window panes, wondering if she would summon him, wondering if she would write again, now that he had read what had never meant to be seen. Lady Evangeline did not summon him the next day, nor the day after that. She moved through the halls with the same ethereal quiet, her heels barely making sound against the old parquet floors. But something had shifted. There was a weight in the air now, like the pause between the intake of breath and what follows. Miles worked silently in the library, arranging her books and brushing dust from the tall curtains. He no longer allowed himself to linger at her door, nor seek signs of more letters. But every time he passed that corridor, he thought of her voice behind him, soft but unflinching. "You knew they were about you," and the way her eyes had not accused, but invited. On the fourth evening after the storm, she appeared in the study without warning. He was on his knees beside the fireplace, coaxing flame from damp wood. He looked up, startled, his face caught in the flickering glow. She stood at the threshold, neither speaking nor moving forward. She wore an ivory robe, the kind that suggested not bedtime, but something ceremonial. Silk edged in lace, the sleeves long enough to brush her knuckles. Her hair was undone for the first time. She looked less like a widow, more like someone who had just remembered she was still alive. "Come," she said simply. No pleas, no explanation. But it wasn't a command, it was a permission. She led him not to her bedchamber, but to the music room. one rarely used except on holidays when visiting nobility expected waltzes and sherry. But the piano had been uncovered, 2 candles lit, and on the chaise near the window, a small crystal decanter with a single glass beside it. "Will you play?" she asked, sitting not on the bench, but on the floor beside it. Her robe pulled around her like fallen snow. Miles hesitated. His fingers were stiff from labor, but he had played once, years ago in Marseille, for a dancer who never stopped moving unless music filled the room. So he sat and began. Not anything remarkable, a slow, melancholy melody in G minor, simple notes that rose and fell like breathing. She closed her eyes, listened, sipped from the glass, and set it down without finishing. Then she spoke. "He never touched me, you know." The words hovered, not accusatory, not even sad, just stated. "My husband," she continued. "He was a good man, tall, smiled easily, but he never once truly reached for me, not even on our wedding night." Miles didn't stop playing, but the melody faltered. "He preferred order," she added, "duty. I was young and quiet, and he mistook that for contentment." He said nothing. The music filled in the spaces where language would have failed. "The letters I wrote," she continued, "were not to him. Not really. Not even at first." She looked up at him now, her gaze catching in the low candlelight. They were to the idea of being wanted, of being known, even in silence. He let his fingers fall still. The room went quiet. "You knew," she said, "before you touched them." He nodded once. "And yet you read." Another nod. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because I wanted to know if someone like you could ever write about someone like me." Her breath hitched, a quiet, sudden exhale, like something had shifted inside her chest. She rose then, slowly, walked toward him. "And now that you've read, I can't unread it." She stepped close, so close he could see the pulse just beneath her collarbone. "You said you didn't know if the letters were still true," she whispered. "Let's find out." Her hand moved, carefully, with purpose, and reached for his shirt collar. Not to pull, but to understand, to test the fabric between them. Her fingers grazed the button, paused. "Do I need to ask?" she said. No. They didn't kiss, not then. But what passed between them in the next few minutes, her hand slipping beneath the collar, his palm resting on her wrist, was more intimate than most mouths would dare. It wasn't lust. Not yet. It was recognition. Two people who had lived in exile from touch, one by circumstance, the other by choice, finally seeing themselves reflected in the stillness of the other. She turned, walking barefoot toward the chaise. He followed, never once needing to ask permission. They sat in the candlelight, close but not touching. She leaned her head against the cushions, eyes half-lidded. "Do you believe in longing?" she asked, voice almost inaudible. "I believe it's the truest part of us, even if it's never returned, especially then." When the candle guttered low, she stood and walked to the door. "Good night, Mr. Whitlock." He stood too, straightened his coat. "Good night, Lady Ashcroft." "Next time," she said without looking back, "knock before entering my thoughts." "Next time," he replied, "write them where I can read them." She paused, then disappeared behind the closing door. The days after that night unfolded like a soft unbuttoning, quiet, unhurried, but deliberate. Lady Ashcroft returned to her routines with elegance, as if nothing had changed. She took breakfast alone in the conservatory. She walked the grounds in her black boots, coat drawn tight against the morning wind. Her hair, once always pinned, now often hung loose in long, shadowy waves. But Miles noticed the difference, the small shift in her gaze when he entered a room, the way her fingertips lingered a fraction longer on the porcelain teacup when she passed it to him. How, once, her knuckles brushed his as he took her gloves, and neither of them apologized. It was a language, one without ink or paper this time, but no less written. Then came the evening she summoned him not with words, but with an object. A single letter laid upon his pillow. The envelope was pale blue, no wax seal, no handwriting. Inside, no words, only a pressed sprig of lavender and the corner of a torn page, as if ripped from a journal. "What is the shape of your restraint, and how long do you think it will hold?" He stared at the page for a long while, his heart echoing the question back at him. Then, wordlessly, he made his way to her chambers. The door was open. A fire glowed low in the hearth, painting the dark walls with amber. She stood before it, facing the flames, arms crossed behind her back. She wore a silk nightgown the color of ink, high at the neck, but bare at the shoulders. Her hair was braided loosely, like something unspoken unraveling down her spine. She did not turn. "You've read enough of my thoughts," she said quietly. "I'd like to read some of yours." He hesitated, then stepped forward, stood behind her, not touching. "I'm not sure where they begin," he said. "Start with what you imagine." He spoke then, slowly, deliberately, told her how, when he first saw her, he mistook her for marble, something carved, unmoving. How he would listen for her footsteps not out of duty, but because her presence calmed him. How he had read her letters one at a time over days, not out of fear of being caught, but because each one undid something inside him. And how he had imagined, more than once, what her breath might sound like in the hush between sentences. She turned then. The look she gave him was not seductive. It was hungry, but not for flesh, for understanding, for being seen. "Then see me," she whispered. He stepped closer. his hands raised, hovering just an inch from her shoulders, not quite touching, asking. She nodded once. When his palms finally made contact with her skin, it was with reverence. She was warm beneath his fingers, the firelight casting delicate lines across her collarbone. He let his thumbs trace the base of her neck, slow, like turning a page. Her breath caught. She reached for his hand, not to stop him, but to guide. Down, over her rib cage, where the fabric was thin and her heart beat close to the surface. Then she spoke the most fragile sentence he had ever heard. I am afraid to be touched, but more afraid not to be. He leaned in, not for a kiss, but to rest his forehead against hers. Then, we will learn slowly, he murmured. And if I tremble, then I will wait. And if I run, then I will find another letter and read until you return. She smiled then, truly smiled, for the first time since he had arrived at Wintermere. They did not undress. They did not make love. But he lay beside her on the velvet chaise, fully clothed, his arm around her shoulders, her face resting against the hollow of his throat. They spoke only once more that night. I once wrote a letter to a version of you who didn't exist, she said softly, and I came searching for a woman I thought I'd only imagined. Then perhaps, she whispered, we are both finally real. The next morning, Miles awoke before dawn and returned to his quarters. There was a new letter on his pillow. This one was longer. No sprig of lavender, only words, handwritten in a neat, deliberate script. There is a difference between being known and being watched. I have been watched all my life. You, for once, knew the difference. There is no need to reply, just keep coming back. He folded the letter slowly and placed it inside his pocket. The final letter came on the first night of summer. Miles found it beneath his breakfast plate, tucked there by hands he had come to know without needing to see. The envelope was heavy this time, its weight not just of paper, but of anticipation. A final ribbon of green, and inside, 5 pages, each more carefully written than the last. You may not yet realize it, but you've already crossed into the part of me that cannot be explained. You did not open the door. You leaned your forehead against it and waited. Tonight, I will not write you. I will show you instead. He knew where to go, not her chamber, not the music room, the solarium, a glass-ceilinged room hidden behind a veil of ivy in disuse, filled with the scent of earth and memory. She had not stepped foot there since her husband's passing he'd overheard. It had once been a place of warmth, roses, tea, laughter, but time, like dust, had dulled its light. When he arrived, the doors were already open. Candlelight flickered along the mosaic tile floor, a trail of dim golden pools leading into the chamber like a dream. She stood at the far end, facing the garden, backlit by moonlight cascading through stained glass. This time, she did not turn. Do you know what tonight is? She asked softly. No. The anniversary of the night I married a man who never once held my gaze in silence. Miles swallowed, but said nothing. And now, she continued, I would like to forget that memory by replacing it with one I choose. She turned then. Her gown tonight was darker than shadow, navy, almost black, with silk that shimmered like water. But it was her expression that held him still, not solemn, not shy, but ready. She approached, and when she reached him, her fingers moved first. Slowly, she removed his coat, folded it carefully. Her hands then slid to the buttons of his shirt. Each one opened with reverence, not hunger. He stood still, letting her dictate the pace. I have never done this on my own terms, she said. Never like this. Then we do it your way, he whispered. She smiled faintly, then reached up, cupping his face. No, she said, our way. What passed between them next cannot be called hurried or wild. There was no tearing of clothes, no desperate breath. It was deliberate, poised, as if both had waited lifetimes and now had no need to rush. His lips met her collarbone first. She gasped, not from pleasure, but from the recognition of being seen there, touched as if the moment were more sacred than sensual. Her hands moved over his back, anchoring herself. Their bodies aligned not like puzzle pieces, but like verses, two lines written in different hands, finding rhyme. Each kiss was a sentence, each breath a comma. She pulled him gently down to the rug she had laid in advance, soft and fragrant with lavender. No bed, no sheets, only the earth beneath them and the open ceiling above, where stars watched silently. They undressed not out of need, but like a ritual. Her skin was warm from the day's sun. His hands were calloused from work, but she did not flinch. In fact, her fingers traced every scar she found, as though memorizing a story he would never tell aloud. When he finally entered her, there was no shudder, no gasp, only stillness and a soft, whispered truth. I am not afraid anymore. They did not speak for a long time after, just lay there, curled against each other, the scent of warm roses drifting in on the wind. When she finally did speak, it was with her lips close to his ear. When you leave tomorrow, I wasn't going to, but you will. You must. He raised himself slightly, eyes searching hers. Why? Because I cannot love you in half-light, Miles. And this house, this world, is all shadows. He swallowed, his voice caught behind emotion. And what will I take with me? The letters, she said, all of them, even the ones I haven't written yet, especially those. He left before dawn. No farewell, only a final glance at the solarium from the garden path, and on the small bench outside, a parcel tied in green ribbon. Inside, the letters, and one final note. If you ever wonder whether it was real, Read them aloud. If your hands tremble, it was real. If your breath catches, it still is. There were once rumors in Prague's old town about a woman who could never be captured on canvas. Not truly. Artists tried. They always tried. But something about her, the stillness of her gaze, the slope of her cheek when she turned away, slipped through oil and pigment like smoke through fingers. Until one man claimed he had done it, not in daylight, not with models or muses, but by candlelight, alone in a locked room. They called her Madame Lise, though no one was certain that was her real name. She arrived one November evening, stepping out of a black carriage in front of an old boarding house tucked between a shuttered theatre and a clockmaker's shop. Her coat was deep burgundy velvet, and her gloved hands held nothing but a folded letter. No luggage, no escort. Inside, she requested a second-floor room, south-facing, quiet. She paid for 6 weeks in advance, in crisp banknotes, still scented faintly of jasmine. She left behind no name, only a request. Tell me if you know a painter, one who does not ask questions. Jakub Pais was not the most talented portraitist in Prague, but he had two things others lacked: patience and silence. He lived above his studio in a cramped flat full of unfinished canvases and the smell of linseed oil. He rarely spoke at gallery showings. Women described him as tall, with a sadness about the eyes. Men said little about him at all. When the letter came, slid quietly under his studio door, he didn't recognize the handwriting, but the parchment was thick, expensive. The ink, deep brown, almost red. If you will paint me, come to number 14, Rue Malastrana, at precisely 8 o'clock in the evening. Bring no assistants, no questions, and candles, only candles. L. He went, of course, not because he believed her to be beautiful or even real, but because there was something in the curve of that L, something breathless, something unsent. The door opened before he could knock. She stood in the doorway like she had been waiting far longer than an evening. Her gown was simple, black silk. Her hair, half pinned, unraveled slowly as she turned. "You're earlier than expected," she said, eyes unreadable. "No one waits for artists," he replied. "We're expected to wait." She stepped aside, let him in. The room was spare but elegant. One chair, one large mirror covered by a sheet, and at the center, a chaise, deep green, like moss beneath snow. No gas lamps, no electricity, just 25 tall candles, unlit. "Do you prefer to be painted nude?" he asked softly. She turned to him, slowly, deliberately. "I prefer to be seen. Whatever form that takes is not my decision to make." He lit the candles with a single match. One by one, they flickered to life until the room glowed like the inside of a lantern. Shadows danced gently against the walls, and she, already seated on the chaise, seemed to breathe with the light itself. He studied her, not her body, but her arrangement. The way one ankle curled over the other, the slight lean of her spine, not quite straight. Her arms, bare to the elbow, held still in a quiet defiance. "Do not speak of beauty," she said suddenly. "That word has never served me. What should I speak of?" She looked past him. Her voice was low. Form, tension, distance, the space between two people who dare not reach. He did not ask her to remove her clothing. He asked her to stay very still. She obeyed, but every 15 minutes she would turn just slightly, tilt her head, adjust a wrist, shift her weight, and he let her, because each new angle was a confession. By the end of the first hour, he had not yet touched brush to canvas. "You paint slowly," she noted. "I haven't started." "Then what have you been doing?" "Waiting," he said, looking directly at her throat, "for the moment when you stop hiding." She said nothing, but the corner of her lip betrayed a smile not meant to be seen. Later that night, after she had gone, without word or sound, he uncovered the mirror. She had not looked in it once, but when he did, the room behind him was still full of her. The chaise, warm where she'd been, the candles, melted, one after another, into uneven pools. The scent of her, sandalwood, and something older, amber, perhaps. He sat down and began to sketch, from memory, from scent, from the curve of silence she had left behind. She returned the next evening, and the one after that. Each time, the pose changed. Each time, the space between them grew smaller. He began sketching with charcoal, then oils, but never with her watching. He would wait until she left, then work deep into the night. Sometimes he would wake in the early hours, hands still curled around the brush. He was not painting her figure. He was painting the tension she carried, the boundary she dared him not to cross. On the 7th night, she came later than usual. Her hair was down, her gloves off, and she did not sit on the chaise. She walked straight to him, took the brush from his hand, and laid it down on the windowsill. "Paint me as I am," she whispered, "but only in candlelight. If you see me in daylight, I'll vanish." The 8th night, she entered already unbuttoning her coat. No words, no greeting, only the soft release of velvet from her shoulders and the dull sound of the latch catching behind her. The candles were already lit, casting their silent amber across the walls. He had prepared the room the same way he did each evening, same linen cloth over the window, same scentless tea in the corner untouched. But this time, she did not go to the chaise. She stood beside him. "Have you ever painted someone from touch, not sight?" she asked. Jakob paused. His brush hovered mid-air. "No." "Then we begin tonight." She took his hand, fingers lightly stained in ochre and grey, and guided it, slowly, to the curve of her waist. His hand tensed, but she held it there. The silk of her gown was warm against his skin, almost too warm, as if lit from within. "Not everything you see is real," she whispered. but everything you feel is. She closed her eyes, exhaled softly, and leaned her head back. He did not draw, he memorized. The gentle pull of fabric at her lower back, the slight tremor in her breath when his knuckles grazed her ribs, the way she didn't flinch, but didn't fully relax either. It was not seduction, it was permission, and it was far more dangerous than either of them had planned. When she finally stepped away, her pupils were wide, nearly eclipsing the gray. Her cheeks bore the faintest flush, not from embarrassment, but from restraint. She returned to the chaise, sat upright, and crossed her legs at the ankle as she always did. "You may paint now," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. Jakob obeyed, but his hands were not steady. He painted without looking at the canvas. He painted from the imprint she had left on his palm, her shape, her weight, the heat of her breath. And for the first time, the painting began to look like her. Not her face, not exactly, but the quiet daring she carried, that defiant softness. It began to bloom on the canvas, like moonlight blooming across a still lake. On the 9th night, she did not speak. She arrived in a dark green slip, over which she wore a shawl so sheer it was practically ceremonial. Her hair, loosely pinned, spilled with intent. Jakob had stopped sketching by now. He simply sat with brush in hand and waited for her to choose a pose. Tonight, she stood in front of the mirror, the one that had been covered all this time. With one hand, she pulled the cloth away. It fell soundlessly. The mirror revealed them both, her body outlined in flame-colored light, and him behind her, caught mid-motion, brush raised, breath held. "I wanted to see how you look when you watch me," she said, not turning. He didn't speak. She dropped the shawl, let it pool around her ankles. For the first time, he saw her bare, not with hunger, not with conquest, but with the awe of a man watching a cathedral open for prayer. Her spine curved like a question asked in silence, her hip gentle and unashamed, her collarbones as delicate as pressed flowers. "Do I still disappear in daylight?" he asked. "You haven't seen me in daylight," she answered, eyes still on the mirror. "Then let me." "No," she whispered, "because in daylight, you might start to understand me, and I don't think I want to be understood." The sessions continued. He no longer asked if he could touch her. She no longer asked if he had finished. Each evening became an unspoken pact. He would paint, she would offer, in pieces. A shoulder one night, a thigh the next, a look that lasted a beat too long. But they never kissed, never crossed the final thread, because something far more intimate was happening. They were building a portrait of restraint, and it was unbearable. On the 14th night, a snowstorm blanketed the city. The windows rattled, the candles shivered. But she came still, wind-blown and breathless. "I almost turned back," she confessed. "Why didn't you?" Because I knew you would still be here with everything ready. He said nothing. He had started leaving the studio door unlocked. He didn't know when that had happened. That night, they did not paint. She sat beside him, not across, not separate. He poured wine. She sipped. They talked about nothing and everything. About the year she first sang in Vienna and how she forgot the second verse. About the child she never had. About the silence of widows and how it sounds like footsteps at the wrong hour. And you, she asked, who did you love? He shook his head. No one I could capture. She smiled, eyes half lidded. Until now. He didn't answer. She stood, walked to the canvas, studied it. It was unfinished. Always was. He never dared complete it. But now, she reached up and, with a finger dipped in oil, drew a faint line across her painted shoulder. There, she whispered. Now, it's done. He stood too quickly, paint clattered, a candle toppled. And suddenly, the distance they had so carefully preserved was gone. They didn't kiss. They just stood there, inches apart. Her hand still on the canvas. His, still wet with paint. I want you, she breathed. But not yet. Why? Because I want the moment before it happens to last. Just a little longer. And after. She smiled, gently, sadly. After, we'll have nothing left to paint. By the 15th night, the painting was nearly complete. But Jakob hesitated. Every stroke now felt like a sentence at the end of a farewell letter. And he had no desire to say goodbye. Not to her, not to this version of himself that only existed in candlelight and silence. She sensed it too. That night, she brought a single item with her, a lace handkerchief, pale and folded neatly. She placed it on the windowsill beside the drying oils. In case we ever need to close this, she said. This? He asked. She didn't answer. They were no longer just artist and subject. They were not yet lovers, either. They existed in the small, dangerous space between, a suspension of consequence, where intimacy grew not from touch, but from all the ways they still hadn't. Jakob began noticing things he had ignored before. The faint tremor in her right hand when she lifted her shawl, the way she blinked slower when she was about to lie, the small scar beneath her left ear, visible only when the candlelight caught it just so. And most of all, he noticed she never stayed past midnight anymore, not even by a minute. On the 16th night, she asked, "Do you ever wonder how this ends?" He looked up from the canvas. All the time. And? It doesn't. Everything ends. Not this, he said. Not if I never finish the painting. She gave him a look both tender and cruel. But if you never finish it, then you were never really painting me, just chasing me. He lowered the brush. Maybe that's all I've ever done. That night, she kissed him. softly, once. It wasn't a climax. It wasn't even a promise. It was a pause, one so delicate it nearly broke him. He wanted to chase it with 10 more, with hands, with mouths, with whispered apologies for all the distance he had so meticulously preserved. But she pulled away. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you still want to." "I do." "Then wait. Just one more night. Paint the final stroke, and then come to me." And with that, she left, earlier than ever. He didn't sleep. He worked through the dawn, through the bells tolling St. Nicholas, through the milkmen and the birds and the return of color to the city. He finished the painting. It was her, but more. It was restraint. It was waiting. It was breath held in a cathedral's hush. It was every line he had never dared to cross, made holy by how long he hadn't. He signed it, or he thought he did. Then he waited. The candles were lit again by 7. By 8, she hadn't come. By 9, he began to worry. By 10, he blew out the candles, one by one. He walked to her boarding house, heart rattling against his ribs. No answer at the door, no light in the windows. A neighbor, sleepy-eyed and scowling, finally muttered from her shutters, "She left this morning, carriage before sunrise, no forwarding address." "Where?" he asked. "Didn't say, didn't even take the room key." She was gone. Just gone. As if her presence had only ever been a mirage inside his studio. He returned home, lit the candles again, and looked at the painting. But something was wrong. He leaned closer. The signature, his, had been wiped away. In its place, a faint, delicate L, written in dried oil, the color of dried roses. For weeks, Jakob refused to leave the studio. He repainted the signature. It vanished. He tried again. New brushes, new paint. Each morning it would fade again, as though the canvas belonged to someone else entirely. Months passed. Spring approached. The days grew longer. The candlelight lost its magic. The painting was moved to the back of the studio, draped once more. Jakob took new commissions, portraits of widows and politicians, merchants and daughters. But none of them looked back at him from the canvas the way she did. Until one evening, in late March, he received a package, wrapped in muslin. No note, no return address. Inside, a smaller canvas, roughly 12 inches across. A painting of him, sitting in his studio, head tilted, brush to lips, candlelight catching the sharp line of his jaw, and across the bottom, in tiny letters barely visible, "For the man who never asked me to stay, but made me wish I could." L, he cried for the first time in years. Not because she was gone, but because she had seen him too. And maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting as well. It had been almost a year. Jakub's studio remained unchanged in the ways that mattered. The light still came in weak and filtered through the fog. The scent of linseed still clung to the floorboards, and the unfinished canvases still lined the walls like quiet regrets. But her canvas, that one, he had never touched again. It stayed behind a dark green drape like a chapel veil, covered but never forgotten. Sometimes, at dusk, when the sun was too weak to cast real color, he would sit across from it and imagine she was just beyond the fabric, leaning against the frame, watching him, smiling that quiet, devastating smile of hers. He never lifted the veil, not anymore. He couldn't risk seeing his own reflection in her absence. Spring returned, with lilacs in the street stalls and lovers on the bridges. One morning, a curator from the National Gallery visited his studio unannounced. A small man with fingers stained from archival dust and a habit of never quite looking artists in the eye. "I've heard of the painting," he said. "The one without a name, the one you won't exhibit." Jakub said nothing. "It's being spoken of in whispers. A few gallery patrons claim to have sensed it." Still, silence. "They say the painting breathes." Jakub turned, finally. "It weeps," he said. "Excuse me." "It weeps in candlelight." That night, Jakub did the unthinkable. He lit the candles again. 25, just as before, each placed exactly where they had been the last night she had posed. Shadows once again flickered across the studio, and something in the air changed. Subtle, sharp. He uncovered the painting, and there she was, still reclined on the chaise, still watching, still slightly turned away, as if she could vanish at the first wrong brushstroke. But now her eyes had changed. They looked straight at him. He backed away, heart thudding. He had never painted her like that, facing him. That wasn't the pose. That wasn't how she had sat. But there she was, watching. And then, in the silence, something even stranger. The scent. Sandalwood. Amber. The faintest trace of smoke and silk. It wasn't memory. It was present. The room smelled like her. Jakub approached slowly, as if approaching an altar. "Liz," he whispered, and the flame nearest her eyes flickered, once, then twice, as though moved by breath. The next night, he lit the candles again. She was back to her usual pose, turned, distant. The change in her gaze had gone, but now the air was colder. He sat and began to sketch her again, from the painting, not memory. For the first time in nearly a year, he touched the brush to canvas. It was meant to be a study, but the more he worked, the warmer the studio became. This continued for weeks. Each night he lit the candles. Each night she changed, subtly. A slight movement of the hand, a tilt of the shoulder. Sometimes a new expression. longing, sadness, desire. He stopped seeing the painting as an image. It had become a presence, and then, on the 30th night, he returned to the studio, and the chaise was empty. The canvas, blank. Jakob collapsed into the chair. His heart pounded. His hands trembled. The woman, his woman, was gone. Not painted over, not faded, just vanished. He stayed that way until morning. When the first light slipped through the curtain, he finally stood and approached the painting again, still blank. But when he leaned close, pressed his palm to the surface, he felt heat, not from the sun, from within the canvas. 3 days passed, no painting, no scent, no shadow. And then, just as quickly, she returned, but not as a figure on the chaise, not even on the canvas. She stood, fully formed, at the far corner of the studio, bathed in candlelight, her gown the same as that last night, her voice the same low hush. "You painted me," she said. He could barely speak. "You never left. I stayed where you kept me. In the painting? In the space between memory and want." He stepped forward, afraid, hopeful. "Can I touch you?" She smiled, and it almost broke him. "Not tonight." "Then why are you here?" "To ask one last thing. Anything." "Blow out the candles." His heart stalled. "But if I do, you'll see me as I truly am. And if I don't, I'll stay a painting, and you'll stay safe." "I don't want safe." "Then choose." He reached for the first candle, blew gently. It flickered, then died. Darkness crept in. He moved to the second, then the third. Each extinguished flame made her face softer, harder to see, but warmer. By the 10th, she was only a glow. By the 20th, she was nearly gone, but he could still feel her, close. And when the last candle died, he reached out and touched skin, warm, real. Her hands wrapped around his, her breath against his neck, her lips, a whisper. The morning came. The studio was quiet. No painting, no canvas, no scent. Only a green shawl folded at the edge of the chaise. And Jakob, he was never seen again. But the boarding house across the street swore they saw someone, a woman, in black silk, each evening at dusk, lighting candles behind the window of the old studio. The theater was supposed to be closed for good. The velvet seats were moth-eaten. The chandeliers hung low with dust. The grand piano on stage was missing 2 keys, and the trapdoor beneath the orchestra pit had warped with water damage from years of neglect. But still, at precisely 6:15 each evening, someone lit the footlights. Only the front row, just enough to cast a golden haze across the velvet curtain, enough to pretend that something, someone, might step out again. And on a rain-polished Tuesday in October, she did. Her name was Sabine Delorme once. The critics called her Vienna's last candle, the woman who burned slowest and longest, the one who never seemed to age, only fade like perfume on silk. She hadn't been seen in public since the summer of 21. Rumors said she'd gone mad, or married, or dead. But now, in a room full of broken seats and no applause, she stepped through the side door in a black coat, trailing a thin line of cigarette smoke behind her like a ghost with unfinished lines. And behind her a man followed, older, limping slightly, holding nothing but a script bound in twine. "I thought you'd changed your mind," he said. "I always change my mind," she replied, removing her gloves, finger by finger. "And yet, here you are, and here you still speak like a director." He gave a tired smile. There were silver threads in his beard now. 6 years, he said, and still, that tone in your voice. She tilted her head, amused. "What tone?" "Like you're always on the verge of laughing at me." She stepped onto the stage. The boards creaked, remembered her weight. "Maybe I am." She stood at center stage and closed her eyes. The ghosts were still there, the ones only she could see. Dancers, stagehands, lovers, versions of herself, half-dressed and half-delirious in the wings. "You've kept the dust," she said. "I find it comforting." "You would." She looked down into the rows of empty seats. In her mind, they weren't empty at all. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "Which one?" "The dress rehearsal. For Madame Lune, the one where the power cut during my monologue. You kept going in the dark. And you came up the steps, not as the director, just as you." He nodded slowly. "I kissed you then." "No." "You hesitated. I kissed you." Silence. Then laughter, soft, real. "You were always the braver one," he admitted. "That's what made you fall for me." "No," he said. "It's what made me terrified of you." She turned toward him, the spotlight long gone but still imagined. "So, why call me back now?" "To finish it," he said. "The final script, the one we never got to stage." She raised a brow. "I thought you burned that." I lied. "Of course you did." He handed her the bound pages. They smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. "Page 37, he said. She flipped through. Her fingers slowed, her breath too. "You wrote this?" she asked. "I wrote us, as we were, as we might have been. It's indecent. It's honest. It's dangerous. It's too late to be anything else." She sat on the edge of the stage, legs crossed beneath her coat, ankles bare. Do you still remember the scene? The one behind the velvet? He did. Of course he did. Behind the curtain, 6 minutes before curtain call, the two of them pressed between ropes and shadows, her back arched slightly from laughter, his hands on her waist, half out of control and half rehearsed. They hadn't spoken for 2 days. That moment, brief, breathless, had undone months of caution. It had tasted like panic and peppermint, and afterward, they never spoke of it again. Until now. What would you have done, she asked, if I hadn't walked away that night? Loved you, he said, without hesitation. And if I'd stayed? You would have left eventually. You always did. She looked at him for a long moment, longer than silence was comfortable. So, she said softly, why now? Why finish the play? Because it's all I have left. There were no tears, not from her. She had learned long ago that crying only dried you out, like cheap roses left in the wings. Instead, she stood and dropped her coat to the floor. Underneath, she wore the dress. The dress. Pale champagne silk, dipped in dusk. The one she had worn on their final night together on stage. It still fit, barely. Time had softened her body, but the outline remained. He stared at her. It's a ghost, he said. So am I. She walked to him, took his hand, and placed it gently against her waist. We won't have this again, she said. No. And we shouldn't. No. But for now, yes. And just like that, the curtain, long forgotten and moth-eaten, stirred behind them, not from wind, but from memory, from heat, from everything they had left unsaid. Sabine stepped back into the light like she'd never left it. The spotlight was imagined, yes. There was no electricity anymore, but in her eyes, the glow returned. She moved with the unhurried grace of someone who knew she was being watched, even if the audience was just a man and a memory. She stood center stage, fingers grazing the edge of the proscenium arch. This place hasn't changed, she whispered. No, he said. Only we have. He watched as she traced a crack in the floorboard with the toe of her shoe. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was loaded, like a forgotten overture waiting to rise. What if we read it together? She offered suddenly. The script, you and I, one last time. He hesitated. You never liked rehearsals. I didn't like you telling me how to feel. And now? Now, I need to remember how I felt without you telling me. She pulled up a single chair, the old wooden one from the final scene of Madame Loon, and sat with the script in her lap. He stood opposite, one foot in the light, the other in shadow. Start from scene 3, she said. That's the one you always skipped. It's the one I never understood. He began reading. His voice was slower than it used to be, and a touch more graveled, but the rhythm was still there. The breath between lines, the ache behind pauses. Sabine listened in stillness. Then came her first line, quiet, hesitant. You know, I don't believe in goodbye. That's not how you used to say it, he said. She looked up, a glint of defiance in her eyes. Maybe that's not how she used to feel. She, the character. You wrote her from yourself. I was 27. I didn't know myself. He walked toward her, slowly. She was afraid, he said. Of what? Of how much she wanted to stay, and what she might become if she did. Sabine's lips parted, not to speak, but to breathe. Deep, unsteady. You're not talking about the script anymore. Neither are you. She turned the page. Her hand trembled just slightly. If I stayed, she read, would you have painted the windows black to keep the world out? No, he answered. I would have opened them so the world could hear how you laughed. She stopped. Their eyes met. Not from across the stage, but from across 1,000 evenings unspoken. Sabine stood, let the script fall to the floor. You're still in love with her, she said. I am. The version of me who was 27. No, he whispered. The one who's standing here now, reading her lines like she's trying not to cry. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough to feel her warmth in the chilled air of the theater. Why did you leave? He asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet, raw. Because if I stayed, I would have given up the stage. You were the stage, and I knew it would kill you to share me. Silence. You were right, he said. Then he did something he hadn't done in 6 years. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers laced with his, like a dancer finding her final partner. Slow, intentional. This isn't the ending, he murmured. No, she said. This is the overture we never played. They sat in the front row together, just as the imagined audience once had. He lit a single match, placing it inside the old oil lamp near the stage's edge. The flame danced on the curtain, golden and soft. Their shadows stretched long across the worn wood. Read the last scene to me, she said. He did. And somewhere between the final line and the silence after, something changed in the air. She rested her head on his shoulder. The scent of her hair, lavender and memory, struck him harder than any monologue. What if we did it? She whispered. What if we staged it one last time? Just you and me. There's no audience left. We don't need one. Just the curtain and the quiet and the memory of the night I forgot to take off my stage makeup because I fell asleep on your chest. He smiled. That was the night you said you'd never leave. I meant it, but you did. I still meant it. The lamp flickered. The stage creaked. She stood and walked toward the velvet curtain again. After the curtain falls, she said slowly, no one claps. No. No one bows. No. But something lingers. Always. She turned to face him. Would you kiss me again? Not as a director, not as a man, just as the one who never really let me go. He rose, walked slowly, and kissed her the way he once did when no one was watching, tender, unfinished, with all the ache of applause that never came. The theater was darker now. Outside, the rain had started, the kind of soft, ceaseless drizzle that turned streets into mirrors. But inside the walls of the theater on De Vienne, it was warm, close. Sabine sat on the edge of the orchestra pit, bare feet dangling inches above the rosin-dusted floor. Her dress, the old one from Madame Lune, was wrinkled now, softer somehow, as though it too remembered something. Her hair had come loose from its twist, and a single strand curled along her cheek. He watched her from the wings, holding 2 mugs of weak tea made on a rusted kettle backstage. You never used to wait in silence, he said, offering her a mug. I never used to have this much to say, she replied. They drank without speaking for a moment. In the hush, the theater breathed around them. Wood groaned, distant pipes sighed. A pigeon flapped somewhere in the rafters like a restless thought. Do you remember the red room? She asked suddenly. The rehearsal space with the broken mirror? The one with the velvet shades? Yes, he said, vividly. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. That night, after Ophelia's waltz, when everyone had gone, and you were still in costume. I wasn't just in costume. A pause. She set the mug aside and turned to face him, her eyes sharper now, a soft burn behind them. I wore that role like skin. I was her. I needed to be her. You were breathtaking. I was starved. For someone to see me as more than the ingenue. He understood now. That's why you kissed me first, he said, and why I didn't stop. That night in the red room had been messy, urgent. Their bodies had spoken faster than their minds. Fingers had slipped buttons, lips had caught on laughter, and the mirror had shown them not as actors, but as something more terrifying. She touched his wrist now, softly, grounding him. Do you regret it? She asked. He shook his head. Only that I let the curtain fall before the act was done. They stood now, both instinctively stepping back onto the stage, the only place they had ever truly spoken without fear. He picked up the script from where it had fallen earlier, pages scattered like forgotten letters. He flipped to the final act. Read this with me, he said. Only if you let me rewrite one line. Which? The part where she walks away. You always hated that. Because I knew she wouldn't. They read. And this time, they didn't act. They moved as if no one would ever see them again. When she placed her hand on his chest, it lingered. When he traced the curve of her collarbone, It wasn't for effect. It was remembrance. And when her voice cracked mid-line, he didn't correct her. He just stepped closer. She whispered, "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're memorizing me all over again." He leaned in, forehead to hers. I never stopped. The rain outside thickened, tapping at the tall windows like a patient audience. She slipped the sleeves of her dress from her shoulders, slowly. It wasn't seductive. It wasn't theatrical. It was sacred, a ritual between those who knew the weight of memory and the ache of still wanting. "I'm not 27 anymore," she whispered. "You're more than you were then. And you? I've become the man who can love you without asking you to choose." They lay side by side on the floorboards of the stage, the script beside them like an afterthought. No lines, no stage directions, just breath and warmth and the unsteady rhythm of two people trying to find where they ended and the play began. "We'll leave tomorrow," she murmured. "Where?" "Somewhere without curtains, without rolls, just light." "And tea?" she smiled. "Stronger than this." He reached for her hand. "And love?" "The kind that stays when the audience is gone." The dawn crept in slowly, dusted in amber and quiet like footsteps over velvet. Light filtered through the broken window panes of the old theater, landing gently across the stage where two figures lay in half sleep. Not tangled, not restless, just still. Sabine stirred first. She turned her head, eyes fluttering open to see the curve of his shoulder rising and falling beneath the coat he tossed over them. His hand was still laced with hers, and for the first time in years, her chest didn't ache upon waking. No stage makeup, no audience, no lines to deliver. Only breath, warmth, and the raw truth of someone who had stayed. She stood and walked barefoot toward the orchestra pit. The light hit the dust in the air just right, like a spotlight. The memory of applause flickered in her ears, but she didn't miss it. Not today. Behind her, he sat up, rubbing his eyes. For a moment, he looked like the young director she'd once defied and adored in equal measure. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked. "Who?" "The world." "I don't think it matters anymore." She nodded, as if that answer satisfied something deeper than memory. They spent the morning collecting old props, not out of need, but reverence. The cracked violin, the tattered fan from La Confession, a single red glove she had once thrown during a final scene and never picked up again. Each item was a relic, not of fame, but of love, of time, of a version of themselves they'd buried in stage lights and silence. "We were good," he said softly. "No," she replied, tracing the edge of the old glove. "We were unforgettable." They didn't speak of what would come next. No declarations, no promises. Just a shared understanding that something had shifted and could never shift back. The final act had already begun, and they weren't afraid of its ending. He returned from backstage with 2 train tickets. She raised an eyebrow. To where? Does it matter? Not anymore. They packed only what they could carry. The dress, the script, a few pieces of paper yellowed with notes in margins. The rest they left behind: stage lights, mirrors, history. Before they stepped out into the afternoon light, Sabine turned once more toward the stage. "Do you remember my last monologue?" she asked. He nodded. "You whispered it. Would you let me say it now?" He stepped back, letting her walk alone to the center of the empty stage. She stood in the light, arms loose at her side, voice barely above a breath. "And if love is a play, let mine end not with bows, but with quiet, with a touch that lingers longer than applause, with the hush of curtains drawn not in grief, but in gratitude." She didn't look at him as she walked back down. She didn't have to. He was already there, holding out his hand. Not for performance, not for pretense, just for the comfort of someone who still remembered who she had been beneath the character. They left the theater without locking the door. They didn't need to. The memories would keep it, years later, from a note found in a dusty box of theater memorabilia donated to a small museum in Salzburg. They were seen boarding a train south, a man with a limp, a woman in silk, hair streaked with silver. They shared a paper cup of strong tea. She rested her head on his shoulder as the train pulled away. Some stories never end. They simply wait to be remembered again. Tell me, at what hour are you listening tonight? And from where in the world? Leave me your time and your place in the comments below. I'll be here, waiting between the lines of another memory. If this journey brought you peace, longing, or a quiet ache, subscribe to Sleep Alchemist and return when you need another story to fall asleep to, or to feel alive with.